Norwegian partners. So what you will see and hear today is part of a bigger project. It's called Contested Ukraine. The project is run by our Norwegian colleagues, and it was designed and actually funded before the full-scale invasion in 2022. So, of course, the project has been affected by this. We've had to redesign parts of what it is that we're doing. But the project Contested Ukraine consists of a number of working packages, and today we'll be presenting some of the results and findings of work package 1, which looks at the temporarily occupied territories. We have 4 speakers today, and I'm very pleased to introduce first my colleague from the National Defence University College of Norway, Håvard Bækken, who runs the Contested Ukraine project. And we have our Ukrainian colleagues. We have a delegation from the National Defence University of Ukraine, and we'll first hear from Andrei Blyuha. Then we'll go to Olha Pashkova, and then finally to Mykola Homanyuk. And we'll have 4 presentations. We'll have a short break. We'll redesign the scene, the stage. We'll put in more tables, and then we'll have a Q&A session by the end, and you can ask questions for all 4 speakers at the end. So with this, I suggest, Håvard, that you kick us off to this very interesting panel. Before Håvard starts speaking, let me also just remind you that this is part of a bigger series. We have 4 events. We had an event this morning on the reconstruction of Mykolaiv. We have an event now, and then we have 2 events tomorrow, so you're very welcome to join us again tomorrow. At 9:30, we'll be looking at lessons learned, prospects for the war, and then we'll have work package 3 of Contested Ukraine, which will be discussing the wider security developments in and around Ukraine. So with that, I think that's enough advertisement. So let's go to Håvard. Please, Håvard.
Thank you. Perfect, Fleming, for a nice introduction to the project as well. So you can see all the cooperating institutional partners here, and you will see about half of the project partners as well today and tomorrow if you attend both events, which you should, and please bring friends. So I prepared my introduction for a general audience, so experts might find some points here, some ideas to be quite obvious, but hopefully not all of them, and hopefully it might also provide some an introduction for further discussions and conversations after we have presented. Common to the entire project is the focus on Russian influence. So luckily today, Russia's influence cannot reach everywhere, and I believe Russian aggression, its own counterproductive aggression in this regard, as well as state countermeasures, have made the Ukrainian population increasingly resilient towards Russian influence and disinformation campaigns directed towards Ukrainian citizens. But in the regions under military occupation, the situation is, of course, very different and very dire. And this is very important because we have, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, still living there, Ukrainian citizens, living in a completely different informational environment. And this will be the topic today. So I will start out by just giving some general framing of how we may interpret this, and then I'll move into more details of my own research. So firstly, a provocative question: is Russia really an occupant? Obviously, it is. Legally and politically. It is an important term to because Ukraine is legally, it can legally deoccupy territories which has been occupied. But if you want to grasp what Russia is doing there in these territories and what it intends to do with these territories long term, we quickly realize that the situation is much worse than simply an occupation. Much more is at stake. Russia does not behave like an occupant in any meaning of the word. It does not follow international norms on how one should act as an occupant. So firstly, and fundamentally, occupation is temporary. So Russia intends to stay forever. This much is very clear. And secondly, an occupant is obliged to leave most social institutions intact. Again, Russia is not by any means following these rules. On the contrary, it does its very best to radically change the society it controls. So it imposes as much Russia upon them as they can. It's fake elections, it's party system, it's laws, it's judges, it's schooling systems, it's teachers. This is not occupation in the normal sense of the word either. And no occupant can legally move people around across borders and eradicate cultural institutions, replace national identities, which is part of the aim. I'll return to that. And absolutely not conscript or mobilize soldiers in occupied territory. This has been part of the international norms for more than 100 years, since before the First World War. So the basic foundation, of course, for all these limitations is that an occupant is by definition not the sovereign power in the occupied regions. But Russia, of course, pretends to be the sovereign power for all practical purposes. So to understand how it acts, we need to keep this in mind. Much more is at stake than we sometimes think when you hear the word occupation, I think. So, okay, one suggestion is to call it maybe an attempted conquest. To conquer and assimilate a massive area with millions of foreign nationals is extremely rare or even unique in the modern world since 1944. I suggest that Russia tries to legitimize the invasion post hoc. So it's like an influence operation after the fact of invasion. It again tries to do what it could not achieve without military means, by other means of influence. So only from this position of military control, Russia can make use of all these typical sort of very powerful tools that states use to unify their populations within, like mass media, schools, monuments, public holidays, youth organizations, as we shall see. So I suspect that Russia hopes for these regions to be completely upset, disrupted, and repopulated by demographic changes and by changing the attitudes and political loyalty of the generations now growing up. And this will be very important, for instance, in the case of a real referendum somewhere up the road. Not only does Russia eradicate Ukrainian cultural markers on the soil it occupies, not only are they attempted to turn into loyal patriots of Russia, children living there, even worse, a considerable part of the training and indoctrination of children is military and militaristic in its content. So training these children to partake in further warfare against their legitimate motherland. This is what I call mass-subversion in the heading of this seminar, but it was really only a term I made up an hour before I sent it to you, Fleming. Yeah, it is already coming into use. So several of us here, three of us, are focused on military patriotic education. I should probably clarify quickly what it is. So it can be understood as an aspect of Russian education and youth policy aimed to teach children devotion and love and a sense of duty to their fatherland, including the will to, quote-unquote, defend it when necessary. So to separate this from patriotic education in general, which is a big thing, military patriotic education has more distinct focus on the military aspects, the military training and the militaristic content of different kind, but also patriotic education in general in Russia has become more and more militaristic in themes. Much focus on, glorifying the military past and present. So as you can see here, it often starts with commemoration and reenactment of historical events and becomes more sinister and more clearly oriented towards the real military profession towards the end. This is, of course, extremely ironic, the whole term of patriotic education, because love and devotion, a sense of duty to the fatherland would, of course, for Ukrainian citizens apply to fight against the occupants, not to listen to how it preaches patriotism for another country. So it's a bit contradictory, but Russia does not appear to care much about it. Okay, so what do I base these claims on about attempted conquest and post hoc legitimation, mass subversion, etc.? So Darja Aspøy, who is here, and myself, we have identified so-called military patriotic clubs for children and youth online in the occupied territories. We have harvested text, photos, video material, Russian language from Russian language social media. And then we sort the data, we put tags on it, we look at different aspects, what the clubs do, how they do it, where they do it, and what online content they share. We try to go as local as possible to avoid the facades and all the propaganda aspect, to go into the local clubs in local communities. The more local, the less polished, is my motto doing research on Russia these days. We have previously completed one similar analysis on the occupied parts of the Donbass from 2014 to 2021, and we are currently working on the territories occupied since 2022. Quite different circumstances. And I've also been doing similar case studies on Russia proper for several years. So if we're going to talk about this, we need to be aware of one of the main actors. A key actor in the world of military patriotic clubs in Russia is UnArmia. It's the largest military patriotic umbrella organization. It's also the biggest, we believe, in occupied Ukraine, among those distinctly militaristic. It has a central staff in Russia, making them, of course, more easy to control and use for all sorts of public events. And they are much more integrated with the schooling system than previous clubs used to be before 2015. This is a fairly new club, whereas military patriotic clubs is an old tradition in Russia. And it's also much more integrated with the Russian Ministry of Defense. So it's a way to combine the schooling system, to integrate the schooling system with the armed forces. And different from previous military patriotic clubs in Russia, UnArmia is also an important propaganda tool in its own right. It has a very striking visual profile, is very much visible in the open, in the public space and in Russian mass media. This is, of course, not most of these photos so far are from Russia. This phenomenon is way bigger in Russia than in occupied Ukraine. Okay, so how are the Ukrainian kids supposed to become Russian by attending these clubs? I don't think we should have the impression that this is the most important tool. Schooling system is probably much more important, just to make that clear. But these clubs are on the increase. One of the first things these clubs did was to conduct frequent trips to Russia, meeting Russians, use their external facilities within Russia, participating in military patriotic contests, military sports, and also military training. And furthermore, UnArmia is just one of many Russian organizations for children established in the occupied territories. Some were established in the very first months. This was also always a sign of Russian intention by 2022, when they, so quickly engaged the younger generation. It's obviously some aim for the far ahead future. At least 5-10 years. UnArmia cooperates closely with these other clubs. It appears a bit random which one. They are all there, but it's very much dependent on who is leading the activities on the local area. This is not throughoutly organized from the top. It also depends on local initiatives. And at the heart of the Russification is, of course, the propagandistic content itself, the symbolic content, the intensive focus on Russian symbols, on commemorating the Soviet and Russian military heroes and events, and other sorts of framing and disinformation. So commemoration of Soviet military history as it is at the core of all military patriotic activity. We have some examples here. Others would include typical ceremonies, putting flowers, reciting poems over Soviet graves, commemorating important dates. Here we have a mural, drawing parallels and showing how the United see themselves as the followers of Soviet traditions. This is from Mariupol. And we also have, these new holidays for reunification of Crimea, for instance, or also for the reunification of the other territories. And the whole patriotic calendar, as I call it, is changing related to this war. And the war is in part itself legitimized by the claim that Ukraine and the West is trying to falsify this history. So history is not just a random thing in this setting. It's at the core of the Russification policy. It's not just remembering the Soviet past, which of course Ukraine shares, but it's a very distinct Russian frame for how the story is told. Okay, you also see the use of symbols. So we have the victory banner. We have the St. George ribbon, which is always present to symbolize the Russian military glory, I would say. It used to be Soviet, but it's increasingly turned also against Ukraine and in favor of Russian soldiers and their warfare in Ukraine. Perhaps more surprisingly to some, there is considerable focus on regional specificity, regional commemoration, regional symbols in these clubs. The more well-organized clubs are very adept in mixing local symbols, local history, local monuments, museums. They visit, local anthropological museums, for instance. They celebrate local heroes. And they mix all these local and regional activities and symbols with the grand narratives about quote-unquote Russian greatness. So this makes sense if you think of it. When most cultural references to Ukraine are eradicated, the well-known local symbols and local history can become an important bridge to build new attachment. Therefore, we can see quite a lot of differentiation of Russian policies in different regions. Kherson may be presented as a crown of the Russian Empire, whereas Donetsk may be celebrating its Soviet past, the mining culture, etc. Zaporizhia for its Cossack history. So we have local symbols. But the key thing is, of course, how all this is linked to Russia. It's common in Russia too, by the way. It's not unique for trying to integrate new territories. It's also how Russian patriotic education is seen as a way to build loyalty from the family up to the local community and up to the state. So this is just an example of how this is just mixed. This is a celebration of the Constitution Day in Luhansk, so the day of the Luhansk People's Republic Constitution. You see the Luhansk flag here. We have, you can't see it, but they also have the Luhansk flag on their UNARMIA uniforms. Here at the very edge, we have also Leonid Pasechnik, who is used to be the leader of the self-declared People's Republic. Now he is Russian appointed head of the same region. But we also have the Russian in a mishmash. We have the Russian United Russia logo on the T-shirt, the teacher here. We have not only Pasechnik, but also Putin in the background. And we have not the constitution celebration, but the annexation event on the screen behind here with Russian flags. So it's always this mishmash. The professional clubs, they mix this together in a useful and purposeful manner, whereas others just a mess like this. So the final point to add to Russification is, of course, militarization. I have mentioned various aspects of this already, so I'll just repeat quickly. The focus on the military is everywhere. It's military training. But it's also a lot of familiarity with guns. These kids get presented guns, and they touch them, they put them apart, they take them apart and put them together. And they have shooting exercises as well. And they often just brand them for photo shoots like this. The kids often go to summer camps in Russia, and they are curated directly by the Ministry of Defense in Russia, most of them, most of the UNARMIA camps now. So they are set up and organized by Russian military. In addition, we have these military themes everywhere, and all kinds of activities they do. If they go to a museum, it's usually, a war museum. Not always, but very often. And they have this support the troops events. Support, you may support them by sending letters to the front lines, or you may support them by being there when they get back and, let them invite them into your organization to hold a lesson of courage, as they call them, or by gathering supplies and send out to the front lines. So you have all the kinds of events. And then I think some other speakers will talk more about the possible recruitment potential here directly. It is very hard to pinpoint what exactly is the recruitment strategy, how the bits and pieces work. Just one example here to add something which is not from UNARMIA. This is from a Cossack battalion in Zaporizhia. They went to visit a school to show off their Cossack traditions, their swords, their whips, and they brought a guitar playing musical tunes, probably Cossack traditional music, and you can see they also were distributing this recruitment as a Russian contract soldier leaflets. I think we have something to discuss there. So, a few conclusions before I give the floor to the next speaker. Russia attempts to permanently control the occupied territories. That is the most crucial one. Russia's policy of Russification threatens deep and permanent disruption, and it involves Ukrainian children into its distinctly militaristic worldview and youth policy, because this is policy in Russia. Most of it's the same in Russia. It should also be said that military patriotic activity is still on a fairly limited scale compared to Russia, to be sure, but it is also on the increase. Many of these clubs started only towards the second half of last year, so this will probably be expanding significantly as these territories remain Russian. And in an effort to end on a positive note, I'll just say that Russia has tried to Russify Ukraine for centuries. This is an age-long Russian tradition. It has not ever succeeded and a modern nation is not easily destroyed. So we don't know yet where this is going. Yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Håvard. And as I said, there will be an opportunity to ask questions by the end of this this session. We have 3 more speakers, and next speaker is Andrei. And Andrei Vilyuha, as I said, is also from the National Defense University of Ukraine and part of this overall research project on contested Ukraine. So please, Andrei.
Can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you for invitation to your country. This is my second time in Copenhagen because past year I was here as well, and I'm glad to be here and present my scientific results. First of all, I want to say that military, my rank is lieutenant colonel, and firstly, my mission was to take a part in the current war. But during my missions in the east of Ukraine, I didn't forget about my second task, because I'm a part of contested Ukraine, and I was trying to collect as much as possible information concerning my scientific research. And in my short presentation, I'm going to show what we have and what we will do in the next stage of our project. So let's continue with our my short agenda. You can see on the screen. This is some economic factors. It will be a short information about what final questions were when children were involved with the irregular military formation. Second one, I think it is one of the most important key points when young generation was under social and psychological pressures during a period. By the way, my period is from 2014 until 2022. Because, as I told you yesterday, my colleagues, that I'm going to continue my research, and my second stage of research will touch some events after full-scale invasion. And about my presentation, the last question will be service of the youth in Donbass in irregular units. First of all, I want to inform you about some very important key points, because usually we are talking about DPR and LPR. I want to remind you that in Ukrainian domestic legislation, we have Верховна Rada's decision, and according to the decision, we proclaimed DPR and LPR as terrorist organizations. Second key point related to the Crimea and occupied territories. In information space, we usually heard about annexation Crimea, annexation of some territories, but according to the Ukrainian legislation, all territories that now are under Russia's control, they are occupied, not annexed, but occupied. So in our legislation and basic documents, you will not see some annexion. In other words, only temporarily occupied territories. So I want to join to my previous speech about young generation. What should we learn our young people? Because yesterday they were kids, today they are teenagers, and tomorrow they can be participants of the current war or members of some irregular military units. So we must today deeply learn this category of local population, because their behavior, their brains, they are very, very vulnerable, and they can be taken under some easy control from Kremlin propaganda, for example. This is one of the main points. When I was in missions in Donbass, as I told you, I was trying to collect as much as possible information about what was motivation for children to join some irregular formations. In this picture, you can see, for example, it was my approximate short investigation, because Russian Federation, under occupation of the territory, has created artificial conditions. According to these conditions, irregular units, for example, members, they had approximately 40,000 rubles. Other categories like Shakhtars, educational sphere, maybe some business member, they had less salaries, and they have lack of finances. So Russia has created conditions in order to involve as many as possible young people in the future to the irregular units. So it was my short investigation in the east of Ukraine past year. As for the picture, you can see that when Russia started hybrid war in the east of Ukraine in 2014, most middle population left this territory. A part of people went to the Ukraine peace territory. A part of local people went to the Russian Federation. So people with limited capabilities, children, they mostly stayed on the occupied territory, and they were in informational vacuum. They were limited in some movement out of occupied territories. And in these conditions, young generation was pressured under some dangerous conditions. Russian Federation social medias, young clubs, parents' influence, and of course in army, as we have heard 10 minutes ago. So these factors were one of the most important, because as I told you, young generation is the most vulnerable category of population. And of course, children didn't have any choices to make some decisions, and children should be adopted to the current life on the occupied territories. The main narratives that focused in the years of Ukraine always on not only on occupied territory, but mostly in Donbass and, for example, in Crimea, local population were focused under the main narrative. Capitalist countries try to occupy east of Ukraine, Crimea, maybe to continue some negative influence on Russian Federation. So these three narratives were always focused on local population, including young generation. Heart of Ukraine, this is like, it was like a struggle between west of Ukraine and east of Ukraine. If you know that most people of east of Ukraine, they speak Russian Federation. And for example, if some people from west of Ukraine come to this region and they start to speak Ukrainian language, local people, they are trying to push back this man and to tell him that you are not in Ukraine. You are not a little bit in another country, but not in Ukraine. That was in some circumstances when people were trying to divide Ukraine on two parts, east of Ukraine and west of Ukraine. What about military education? I want to pay your attention on the second stage of this slide. Why? Because in this case, young generation from approximately 8 years to 18 years, they are participating in many events, military camps, junior military organization, military patriotic games, and other events which related to the military education. And in this period, mostly young generation is like zombified. They are becoming a part of military Russian machine. And I want to show you after to be or not to be. What does it mean? When young people becomes older, they have a choice to be a part of military machine or to be a part of something another. Unfortunately, propaganda does often results. We know that Russian propaganda, one of the most powerful information machine that they has a huge influence on people. And one of the weakest people are our children. And in the end of their childness, they have to choose to be a part of irregular units, for example, where they can get much money, or to be a part of some shakhtars or other sphere of activities and to get less of money. Unfortunately, many people choose second way. They join to the irregular military formations, and after that, when full-scale invasion started, they continue to take a part in our current war on the territory of Ukraine. What about categories of the youth recruiting? I was trying to choose the main of them. On this screenshot, you can see 3 categories. Forced recruitment, this is like kidnapping on other streets, causing other harm to children or members of their families. Centralized recruitment, it's a simple way. When a guy or a boy becomes 18 years old, he should join to the army if he doesn't have superior education. And the last one is voluntary participation. During 2014 till 2022, on the territory of DPR and LPR, we had a lot of cases when young people joined as volunteers to support some irregular units. What did they do? Escort some prisoners to protect, maybe to protect some military facilities, to bring some food, to give some some projectiles or whenever. So that was their volunteer participation in military activities. Of course, these activities in the future, they will have some negative results on children's activities. And as for the conclusions, I would like to show you just short conclusion concerning my research. That usually current scientific papers, scientific researches, they are based on the strategic level in researches. But less of information we can find about children, about the young generation. So I would like to develop this direction of research and to create a larger field of research in this area. and of course concerning improving international legislation. On the paper, we can find a lot of information about punishing people involved children to the irregular formation, but in reality, this doesn't respond to the current life, because a lot of children have participated in irregular units and nobody was punished. Thank you very much. I hope it was useful for you, and I'm glad to answer on your questions. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Very interesting, and it ties very well, of course, into what we already heard from Håvard's side. We turn to our third speaker, Olha, who is in the back and will be joining me here on the stage. And Olha of Pashkova, of course, is also from the National Defense University of Ukraine. So welcome. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. If you hear me, yeah, it's fine? Okay. My name is Olha Pashkova. I'm from National University Defense of Ukraine. I'm a senior researcher of the Center of Military History, PhD in history. And the focus of my research is use of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. We started with occupied territories of Crimea and Donbass, but now we, with my colleagues from my group, research group, expand our research for the newly occupied territories. My colleagues were very detailed of how what was going on the temporarily occupied territories from 2014. I will be more detailed on the first few months of the large-scale invasion in 2022. It's been 10 years since certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions were occupied and third republics declared. This year it's 10 years. Their artificial nature was manifested in almost identical names, state structure, legislation, and their gravity to Russia. But for these 8 years since 2014, the question of the future of the local population has been raised. What will happen to those who live in this territory? And specifically, what will happen to those who grew up and formed under conditions of the occupation? The policy of conquering countries in relation to the population of the occupied territories consists in an attempt to subjugate, to form loyalty to aggressor state, as well as education of the younger generation within the framework of its national interests. Specifically, the labor exploitation and mobilization resource. So in short-term purposes of the Russian Federation for the children population of that territories was the labor resource and mobilization resource, and in long term it's providing identity crisis and impossibility of reintegration of these people into Ukrainian society, which Håvard was very detailed with. Also how they achieve their purposes through official education system. My colleagues talked about this specifically, and different social activities. But still the effect of all these measures was the use of the male population as combatants. Well, mobilization as such is a very complex phenomenon, and it, as a rule, causes very significant resonance in society because it fundamentally changes the life of civilian population. We mentioned how challenging is mobilization today in Ukraine when, for Ukrainian civil society and for government, when Ukrainian authorities should be aware how to provide all sectors of economy due to outflow of the labor force to the military. But still, mobilization remains an important measure that any state uses to gain its goals in the war, whether offensive or defensive. And on the eve of the large scale of Russian invasion in the territory of Ukraine, the male population of the so-called republics came under the mobilization organized by the local occupation administration. Specifically on February 19, 2022, the occupation administration announced the general mobilization of men aged 18-55, and with time this age was increased to 65. And a part of conscripted soldiers was made up of local university students aged 18-23. In this research, the main focus will be on the mobilization of this category of the conscripted. Due to the peculiarities of their growth and socializations over the years, because during the occupations from 2014, these young men were primary and secondary school children. And as a consequences, they are likely to have experienced conditions in both educational and non-educational environment, which facilitated their mindset about the concept of patriotism, the concept of motherland, the image of enemy, etc. So this is a brief view of how students of the local education institutions were involved in the mobilization measures. And it is worth to conditionally classify them into students of the civilian higher education institutions and cadets of the so-called military education institutions, though cadets weren't mobilized in traditional way, but their participation in large-scale war is also an interest because they deliberately chose the military profession, so they were aware that sooner or later they will be involved in conflict against Ukraine. So on February 19, 2022, the activities of civilian educational institutions were suspended on the temporarily occupied territories. And at this point, all students of all university and vocational school, both full-time and part-time, fell under mobilization activities. And across the Donetsk region, forced conscripted included students from the at least 9 educational institutions. To prevent the outflow of mobilization resource, the Russian Federation made it impossible for men to leave the so-called republic. And still the only way to cross the border and flee to the Russia was for a bribe, which some students apparently took advantage of and escaped to Russia. Other one who wanted to avoid mobilization tried to hide. Due to occurrence of forced conscription of young men in public places, students hid either in the places of permanent residence or elsewhere to avoid receiving summonses. Some young men were taken from home, from the street. Others came voluntarily when they received summonses. But one group of students were taken directly from their institutions. So from this point of view, it's worth to know the key role that pedagogical staff of these educational institutions appears to have had in mobilization activities, potentially under duress, maybe voluntarily. In fact, the administration and teaching staff facilitated student arrival at the institutions. In particular, students received invitations for the meetings where representatives of the so-called military commissariats were present. They also distributed summonses directly to their addresses because they know the whole information about their students, where they live, where they go, and so on. Also, they compiled and provided lists of students who had not yet been mobilized to military commissariats, and even threatened expulsion or criminal legal consequences for avoidance of the receiving summonses. Also, teaching staff directly participated in hostilities, but it's more common for teaching staff of the so-called military education institution, specifically the Donetsk Academy of Internal Affairs. By the summer of 2022, 35 representatives of the officers' staff of this institution are known to have participated in conflict. Cases of mobilized students being captured by the Ukraine Defense Forces were first recorded in March 2022. So this suggests that the conscripts were dispatched to the area of hostilities with little or no training being conducted. Despite commitments given to some students that they would only participate in 2 or 3 days military training, and they would not participate in hostilities or would be sent outside of the so-called republics. Mobilized students of the DPR, LPR rapidly appeared as a part of the Russian forces along the whole front line in the almost all regions of Ukraine. Some mobilized students appear to have been conscripted without passing medical commissions. Lack of basic military training, in particular fire training, low level of technical, medical, nutrition and monetary support were also recorded. Mobilized students were given arms that were sometimes unavailable to use, and food rations only for 2-3 days that led to looting on the occupied settlements of the Ukraine. And low level of training and technical equipment might have contributed to significant losses among the student conscripts. In general, by the mid of August 2022, the death roll of whole conscripted male population of these territories was about 30,000. We don't know how many of them were student conscripts, but in the autumn of 2022, it was reported that about a third part of the students of the one of the vocational school of the Donetsk region had died. One of the units of so-called DPR, staffed mainly only by conscripted students or workers, lost about 40% in the battles for Mariupol. So there is a question why people with the zero combat experience or special skills were directly sent to the front line without training. Well, apparently expecting a very quick success of the so-called special military operation, Russian authorities relied on the old Soviet tradition to prioritize quantity over quality. So the more human resource, the better. The extra arms to hold the firearms, the extra leg to go into attack. So mobilized students, in fact, were recruited among the all entire front line as a part of the different units that they were sent to the Kharkiv region, to Mariupol area, the Kherson, Mykola, and Zaporizhia regions, and been identified in various positions. As for the cadets, according to the one source, the cadets of the Internal Academy of Internal Affairs of the first and the second years weren't directly involved in hostilities. They were protecting air defense systems, warehouses, and the cadets of the third and fifth courses were directly involved in hostilities, mostly in the Mariupol area. And according to the data about the losers among this category of combatants, the fact that the third and fifth year cadets predominate among the dead cadets, it confirms the data that the first and the second years cadets were not directly involved in the hostilities. And by the summer of 2022, it was known that 688 cadets of this academy took part in the conflict. Not all of them were in the front line, but still. Of course, the mobilization as itself and the mobilization of the students caused the huge reaction from the local society, female society, of course. And during the spring and summer of 2022, there were some female protests, wives and mothers of the conscripted students and cadets who were apparently dissatisfied with the effect of the involving the children to the hostilities. And despite these protests were suppressed very quickly, still the so-called authorities of the so-called republics made some mitigating measures to reduce tension in society. For example, they provided automatic transfer to the next course for students without passing exams, transferring from studying for tuition for the free studying, and the continuation of the payment of scholarships. But to the end of May of 2022, the so-called republics moved to exempt all current students from the conscription. And as it was known in September 2022, the Russian authorities instructed the occupation administration in Donbass to demobilize all previously conscripted students, and any who refused to mobilize had to sign a contract. So this was just a brief report how it started, how it was going for students of the occupied territories of Donbass, how they were conscripted. Of course, there is a question, what did they really fight for? After the huge influence after that 8 years of occupation. Of course, we can say that some of them willingly, voluntarily came to the commissariats and wanted to take part in the hostilities against Ukraine. But for most of them, as I believe, it was just a fear of the possible consequences, legal consequences, exemption. Some of them maybe truly believed that this so-called military operation wouldn't take long, maybe days, maybe weeks, but no longer, and they wouldn't be sent outside of the so-called republics. But what is the worst of this situation is that their own education institutions turned into traps, and their own education staff, people who had to educate them to form their mindset, they transferred them to the military. That's ironic and that's sad. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Olha, for this very convincing and detailed introduction also to an important topic. And with this, we have reached the fourth and final leg of this panel. Mykola, Homanyuk will join me now on stage, and this completes then this round trip throughout the temporarily occupied territories. And as I said before, following Mykola's presentation, we'll have a short break, and then we'll rearrange the stage, and then we'll be ready for your questions, and we'll have a discussion after that. So, Mykola, please.
Do you hear me? Hello, everyone. I'm apologize for delay. I will talk about Lenin monuments on the temporary occupied part of Ukraine. As you know, Ukraine after the second Maidan Revolution of Dignity in 2015, Ukraine launched a broad campaign of decommunization, taking down thousands of monuments related to Soviet past and renaming tens of thousands of streets. During the Russian-Ukrainian war, starting in 2014, a few monuments to Lenin reappeared in cities and villages in the occupied part of Ukraine. While in 2014-2022, there were just rare cases. After the full-scale aggression against Ukraine, a number of returned Lenins reached almost 30 monuments. The first Lenin monument was erected in the city of Henichsk at 8 April 2022. By the way, Henichsk is a so-called capital of so-called one of the subject of Russian Federation, and here you can see even the stages how this Lenin was erected in this city. By the way, this pedestal for me is take after mausoleum in Moscow. Since spring 2022, we can observe parade of Lenins in recently occupied Ukraine. For instance, this is city of Lysychansk, Luhansk Oblast, the bust of Lenin. City of Starobilsk, also Luhansk Oblast, and the ceremony of opening of this bust. This is a picture from town of Kalanchak, Kherson Oblast. This is a picture from Volnovakha town, Donetsk Oblast, May 2022. And here you can see a spreading of restored Lenin monuments during the last 2 years. As you see, all occupied part of Ukraine is characterized by existence of restored Lenin monuments. From northeast Kharkiv region, now is a liberated part, mainly in the city of Volchansk, and to south Ukraine, mainly Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. In addition, the intention of erecting a number of Lenin monuments was announced by occupiers in other Ukrainian cities. However, in the second half of 2023, this process slowed it down. Since the last 11 months, just 3 Lenin monuments have appeared in recently occupied areas. And it was one small city and 2 villages in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. And on this table you can see the chronological order of Lenin monuments appearing in occupied part of Ukraine. Most often Lenin monuments appeared on Lenin's birthday, April 22, and Victory Day, May 9. Therefore, I do not expect that by the end of the year the number of Lenin monuments, memorials will exceed from previous year. I explored sources, mainly Telegram channels and other open internet sources, and tried to recognize their memory activists, people or organization who initiated the restoring of Lenin monuments. So the rebuilding of Lenin monuments in different Ukrainian cities and villages was initiated by different actors, separate person, informal group, and organization. Here you can see the list of memory activists who was engaged in that activities. The most active was Communist Party of Russian Federation, Communist Party of Donetsk People Republic, Union of Communists of Lugansk region. It's the same organization as Communist Party of Lugansk People Republic, and in one case political party from Russia Federation, United Russia, was involved in such activity. And as you see, the main actor in this activity was Communist Party of Russia Federation and communist parties from unrecognized separatistic republic in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. In 2033, Russian Senator Ayrat Gubadinov, a member of Communist Party of Russia Federation, made a statement that Lenin monuments will be restored in all territories of the Kherson region. But despite of that, despite of this speech, that didn't happen. Here you can see the Lenin monument in front of Henichsk local administration. Returning to the main question, what does Lenin monuments return to Russia-occupied Ukraine mean? Of course, the policy of memory of Russian Federation is a huge construct with contradictions and many actors. But in my opinion, one of the reasons for the restoration of Lenin monuments in the occupied territories is related to the critical assessment of Lenin's role in relation to Ukraine, which often appears in Putin's speeches. As you know, Putin depicts Lenin as an inventor of Ukraine. During the last decade, Lenin in Russia is, for me, is very carefully but surely being removed from public space. Here you can see article from The Guardian about small-scale celebration of 2024 100th anniversary of Lenin death. Since 2005, the Lenin Mausoleum in Moscow on the Red Square has been covered annually on Victory Day. In 2000s, several Lenin monuments were replaced in several cities, from central part of the cities to periphery. In 2012, another member of State Duma, Alexander Kurdyumov, discussed removing Lenin monuments from central squares to other sites. In 2022, Lenin monuments in Khabarovsk, it's a big region, Khabarovsk, capital of big region. This monument were closed to view during the Victory Day celebration, which caused a negative reaction from several left-wing politicians and activists. The same case we had in Cherkess, the capital of the another region, Russian region. They believe that this shows how regional leaders express their support to Putin's historical view. Thus, the occupied territories of Ukraine became a territory where the Russian leftish, so-called systematic opposition, felt freer than in Russia itself. It maybe sounds as a paradox, but for me it's true. For a while, the occupied territories of Ukraine became a territory where Russian politicians and memory activists could realize goals that were impossible to achieve in their home country. At the same time, the occupation provide an opportunity for revenge for communist ideology supporters in Ukraine, where the Communist Party have been banned since 2015. However, starting from mid-2023, the situation in the occupied territories ceased to be favorable for the leftist politicians and activists. Although dismantled Lenin statues have been preserved in several occupied cities as objects in a local history museum or in storage in local authority buildings. Occupiers and collaborators don't hurry to return them to pedestals already. I consider it is evidence that leaders, heads of occupied authorities just are afraid to do something against the hidden historical and political agenda in Russia Federation. Thank you for attention. I'm finished.
Thank you, Mykola. With this, we have come to the end of this first part of the panel. We'll have a short break. Let's do a 10-minute break. You can stretch your legs, go outside, maybe take some fresh air, and then we come back in, and then we will have a setting here for all speakers to be on the stage, and we'll take your questions then and hopefully engage in discussion. Yes, we have. Like to direct your question to a particular speaker, then please do so also. Otherwise, we'll just distribute the questions among the various speakers. So let's start. Who would like to open? Just wait for the microphone, please.
My question is from Håvard. Your presentation slide 2, please.
Oh,
Presentation.
yes. The for Håvard.
Vitaly, translate my question, please.
We will find Håvard's presentation, slide number 2. And we'll turn the projector on.
Ну, поки
It's very
запускають
specific.
презентацію, суть питання звучить такого плану. У відповідності до Гаазької конвенції 907 року, Женевської конвенції 49-го і, опять же, Гаазької 54-го, окупація, тобто окупант, заняття збройними силами однієї частини держави без отримання суверенних прав на неї. У вашому слайді написано «Росія не поводиться як окупант». В контексті слайду я не згідний. Прошу пояснити, будь ласка, як тоді поводить себе Росія і що вона повинна зробити для того, щоб ви її назвали окупантом. Дякую.
We'll just have a translation. Yes.
According to Hague and Geneva Convention, occupation is when the armed forces of one country is situated, is controlled that part of the territory of the other country without a legal background, without any permission, without international law possibilities. On your second slide, it is mentioned that Russia behaves not like occupant. So my question is of two parts. In what way Russia is behaved there, and what should Russia do for you to name it the occupant? Am I clear?
Yes. Thank you. This is simply a misunderstanding. So I will happily be taking up this one again. Is Russia an occupant? Yes. This is my answer. It is legally and politically an occupant. No doubt about it. From the perspective of analysis, to understand what Russian strategy is, I'm simply saying that Russia is even more than an occupant. It is an occupant, but it is also trying to conquer Ukraine and take this territory permanently. So this is about Russian strategy, Russian intention, and Russian policy. So legally, according to the Geneva Convention, Hague Convention, of course, it is an occupant on all these territories. So I completely agree, and I'm sorry if this was not entirely clear.
Дякую, але якщо розглядати в контексті самого слайду, звучить некоректно. І для мене, як для українця, це є неприємним. Дякую.
Thank you very much for your answer, but if we take the slide as it is, it sounds not much correct, and for me as a Ukrainian, it's a bit difficult to take it.
Okay, I'd like to hear more about that. I don't know why exactly.
Thank you.
Please do. Please turn on.
One more time. Yeah. I suppose that Russia will never recognize itself as occupant. This is simple explanation because this term doesn't follow Russian policy. That's all. They are trying to, according to their policy, to recover own territory they lost during Soviet times. This is a simple explanation. Перекладіть, будь ласка.
All right. So thank you for this clarification. Do we have another question? Please, Andrew, at the back. And then in the front.
A question for Håvard, Mykola, anybody else? You briefly mentioned differential propaganda in different occupied regions. briefly. How would we try and measure that? What would we look for? What evidence have you seen for that differentiation?
Would you like to start?
I will start. About differentiation of the policy in recently occupied territory of Russia, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. For my opinion, there are two, let's say, poles of this policy. Soviet-oriented policy historically, with using the narratives related to Soviet history, and the empire pole, which means using the imperial narratives in historical policy in occupied territory. And in Kherson region, for instance, occupiers try to occupiers launch the historical policy oriented to empire heritage. They consider Kherson, for instance, Oblast as a part of Tavricheskaya and Khersonskaya governorate, and treat Kherson Oblast as an ancestor, descender of that administrative, that empire time administrative units. In Luhansk Oblast, for instance, the main discourse in propaganda materials related to Soviet time, Soviet period, mainly Great Patriotic War, rebuilding of Soviet industry, and after Second World War, Soviet heroes, Soviet veterans, Soviet characters at all. So there is no unified historical policy in for recently occupied territory is my answer.
I'll just add to that. You know, the sources for actually measuring it may be multiple, so I think it's not too hard to actually get the answer if this is a systematic phenomenon or not. It is very difficult to see whether it is an intended master plan behind it or whether it's whether something else, but it is a part of Russian patriotic education policy in the documents that one should connect these different types of attachment to one another. So it actually is part of the whole idea of Malaya Rodina, the little motherland, to build this regional attachment. We can see it through, I guess, street names like Mykola has done, and monuments. What heroes do they celebrate in events, in commemoration? We can see what events they celebrate. So it's always about connecting the local and the federal great narrative. It was very obvious in the data from the Donbass. I looked at this data from 2014 through 2021. It was a very clear change in how the symbols changed, especially between 2018 and 2019. So on the very same days, commemorating or celebrating the independence declarations of 2014, the day of Luhansk, for instance, in May 2018, all the flags were just Luhansk People's Republic flags. In 2019 already, everything had changed to Russian, and all the slogans were changed. This is suggests to me that there is some kind of central agency here involved in sending out this, not only a signal, but I guess also the flags themselves, because this is a kind of suddenly a mass phenomenon changing overnight. We have a lot of interesting things to look for when it comes to regional differentiation in occupied Ukraine. I mentioned some of them. Mykola as well. you have this interesting material from the billboards in Kherson city, how they also build on people from Kherson being part of the empire, important empire builders with their home base in Kherson. But I'm also very interested in going further into the Cossack identities, because they are so politicized and there are very distinct ideas of the Cossack, which is glorified in Russia. But there's also a very important Cossack identity of Ukraine. And these are almost, opposites. And we can see how Russia, through its Cossack organizations, are also engaging in this symbolic fight, and they are combining it with actual militias who are now determined, to retake the Zaporizhian Sich. So there's a symbolic fight here with a clear regional dimension to it, and I think the Russian state policy makes it probable that this is also a strategic intent, though it's very hard to pinpoint that exact point.
Mm-hmm.
May I add some
Yes, please, of course.
Håvard just mentioned the Cossack state, so I would like to return a little bit in the history of Ukraine. In 1644 or 1655, when was a war between Poland and Ukraine, maybe Bogdan Khmelnytsky was hetman of Ukraine. And it was a really hard situation in Ukraine, because Poland wanted to occupy full territory of Ukraine. And Bogdan Khmelnytsky asked Moscow to sign some agreement. And in this period, Ukraine and Moscow signed March articles. According to these March articles, Ukraine was under protection of Moscovia, but as an independent state. But Putin now is trying to change this history. He is talking about Ukraine. Ukraine signed these articles as a part of Moscovia, but this is not true. So this is Russian policy always is changed, and they're trying to make some misinformation and to take some advantages from this misinformation. So this is a real face of a current Russian Federation and his president.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cossacks is also in they are quite popular in Luhansk People's Republic in the period, before the annexation attempt by Russia. The Cossack story is quite popular. There's at least 2 clubs in our sample based on Cossack identities. They're also promoting this idea of Cossacks being front fighters for the Russian civilization against the West, and meaning also Western Ukraine. So it's an attachment of the idea of Cossacks fighting to protect the civilizational borders of the Russian world, and the Second World War fight against Ukraine in the forms of Ukrainian collaborators. So it's trying to connect all these dots, to connect the Cossack history, to connect it to the Second World War, and to connect it to the situation today and since 2014. And all these 3 wars are promoted as the continuation of one and the same war, where exactly the Donbas people are supposed to be the frontline fighters, and for this reason a very highly militarized people of Donbassians. That was one of the ideas promoted at that time.
May I add again?
Yes, please.
About the Cossacks, original Cossacks, they appeared in 14th century on the territory of Ukraine. And in 16th century, they created own state. As you said, Zaporizhzhia Sich. It was on the territory of the modern Zaporizhzhia. But in 1754, when Ekaterina II destroyed Zaporizhzhia Sich, a part of this Cossack, they were shared all over Ukraine, and a part of them left Ukraine and stayed in Kuban, So this part of Kuban Cossacks, they are originally from the Ukraine. But Russian Federation, again, is trying to change history and is talking that these Donski Cossacks originally are from Russian. It is not true. Everything concerning Cossacks history starting from Ukraine.
Thank you. We have a question here, and then after that we'll have a question at the back. Thank you.
My name is Christian Nielsen. I'm a private person interested in these matters. I have a question to the battle of minds, especially in the areas that have now been occupied by Russia in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Donetsk, Luhansk, that was not occupied before 22. And if you look at the battle of minds, there are three things, I think. One is all the atrocities that you saw in the liberated areas, Izum, Bucha, and Kherson. The other thing is that if you look at the what happened in Donbass, the republic, from 14 to 22, it was a cesspit of corruption, crime, all sorts of non-attractive things. People in these provinces must have known what has happened there. And the third thing is that when you look at the refugee statistics, there are 2 million Ukrainians in Poland, etc. But apparently there's also more than 1 million Ukrainians that went into Russia as refugees. Does that mean that from these provinces, those who are, shall we say, sympathetic to Russia, they have gone to Russia? Okay.
Thank you. So a question about Ukrainian refugees who have gone to Russia. Who would like to answer this question?
I can.
Please unmute.
I can answer. Of course, there were Russian world supporters in Ukraine, like in the whole world. And after the full-scale aggression, and in time before the occupation of Kherson, Kharkiv Oblast, people of that territory must decide what to do. For instance, I'm originally from Kherson. I live there till now, and I know from my personal observation there are two types of people who went to Russia. The first one is a group of Russia supporters, which includes also collaborators. And the second group is Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian people who just had no way how to escape hostilities, dangerous situation, and in the case when front line was closest to escape to go in the territory of controlled by Ukrainian forces, they should went to Russia Federation. And I know several examples, several people who are now staying in Russia and who are pro-Ukrainian people. This is quite common things.
Please unmute. Yeah.
Also, deportation as well.
Forced deportation.
Yeah. So according to Ukrainian estimates, I think the most commonly cited number is 250,000 kids have been deported across the border to Russia, and here we can see quite a mix of how this was arranged from the Russian side. Some went there voluntarily, some were incentivized strongly. So these families were offered free trips for their kids away from the front line to a safer place with activities, leisure activities, more social welfare, and more functioning infrastructure around them. And when parents still would not take these incentives, we also have a lot of reports on increasing pressure on them to let their children go, and up to the direct threats of applying force and taking their kids away permanently. So very, very harsh threats. And also we have a lot of cases of kids who were supposed to be returned, never being returned. So they also are still in Russia. 20,000 Ukrainian kids are still, that we have the names on, are still not accounted for, but we think they are in Russia. There are several initiatives to bring them back. So it's a very mixed picture. Like Mykola said, a lot of those moving to Russia, certainly collaborators, or simply not even collaborators, but just they would like Russia, ordinary people who would like to live in Russia. But this is a very mixed group, and it's a very big group.
And vice versa, people who support Russia could go to Europe or even America.
Thank you. We have a question at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Mogens Pill from the University of Copenhagen. My question is a bit nerdy, but I'm a historian, and I'm also particularly interested in Southeastern Europe, Ottoman history. My question regards which is in traditional history. The traditional narrative is known as the Russian expansion southwest during Catherine II, all the way down to the Black Sea. It's about again Ottomans, so it's often celebrated in Southeastern Europe. They take away the power from the vassals of the Ottomans, and the north coast of the Black Sea becomes come under Russian domination. How is this history, which is very important from the point of view of a lot of movements in the southeastern of Europe, but also geopolitically, how is that framed? Are there divergences in the writing of Ukrainian history, especially these days, from that narrative? Is it a liberation? Is it a reoccupation? We also have a period when Odessa and Mariupol becomes populated by Greeks, among others, in this period. How is all this, let's say, framed and handled in the narratives which you have, or have they changed?
Anyone who would like to attempt an answer here?
Well, I'm not a historian, but I'm, let's say, local historian, краєзнавець, and I'm just observing how historical narratives are changing, even now. As you said, in old historical narrative, history started from conquest of Black Sea region by Russian Empire, and all pre-Russian history was erased at all. Russians brought the civilization for wild steppe, wild field. But it's not true, because, for instance, I was born in city of Kakhovka. Officially, the Kakhovka was founded in 1791, but Kakhovka was founded on the ruins of old Crimean Tatar settlement, Aslan Kermen. But that part of history was erased by Russian, and even in first 20 years of Ukrainian independence, we also didn't care about this period of history, Crimean Tatar period of history, Nogai people history, or Ottoman Empire part of history. Now, in my city of Kherson, we are trying to return this part of history. For instance, during the campaign of decolonization, we changed all, not all, but the bulk of street names in my city. And I was a member of toponymy commission, and we proposed to rename several streets names related to Crimean Tatar history. But unfortunately, Khersonids people, Kherson inhabitants didn't support this idea. So it means the big part of inhabitants of South Ukraine, of my city of Kherson, are still under this Russian Empire grand historical narrative. This Crimean history is something unusual, something scared maybe, something xenophobic maybe. So we are in the process.
Can I continue? Thank you very much for your question. It is really interesting question because we usually watch some news. We usually hear some information that Russia, and after that Ukraine always on the second place after Russia. The answer is very simple. Ukrainian history is stolen by Russia, because Russia Federation has own imperialistic ambitions. Russia always tried to collect all Russian Empire territories, collect and create, restore a new maybe Russian Empire. If we takes for example some post-Soviet countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, why does Russia don't touch them? Because they are under NATO umbrella. Now Ukraine a little bit in another case. We are not as a part of the strongest military bloc, so Russia found this our weakness and trying to get own imperialistic aim. So this is my opinion in this case. Only misinformation and stolen of our original history. But everybody knows in Ukraine that Kiev Rus, this is our motherland, was created in 11th century, but Moscovia was created in 13th century. So 200 years our motherland Kiev Rus existed, but after that Russia appeared on the map of the world. But unfortunately, Russia doesn't accept this information and try to change history.
Distort.
Yes.
History.
Thank you for this, and of course we all now understand the importance of studying and understanding history, which is very good. We have another question in the back.
I may be the very odd one out in this crowd, but so I'm from the private sector. I'm a student and worker. I'm from Romania, and I'm very passionate about what we're talking here, so that's why I'm here. So my question comes from my experience. As a Romanian, when I came here around 5 or 6 years ago, there were many things that I understand. And then there was at some point where we realized there's something Europe doesn't understand, let's say Western Europe, Northern Europe, about my country. And then very fast I understood that there's many things we don't understand about Western, Northern Europe. And it's also we who mess up in our relation, in the way we talk, in the way we communicate. It definitely goes both ways. So now on you, on the stage, on the maybe Håvard, maybe a bit on the northern side, and some of you on the Ukrainian side. What are the things, let's say, Northern Europe doesn't understand, or seems like it doesn't understand about Ukraine at the moment, let's say? And on the other hand, what are the things Ukraine maybe misses to understand of how, let's say, Northern Europeans tend to think about problems and issues and challenge them? And maybe there are some things hard to follow on both sides, and maybe it's always interesting to hear it, like what stuff to get from the other side and where do we all mess up. And
Great.
forgive my jargon again.
Oh, great, great, great. Thank you very much. Where are our blind spots? What is it that we fail to understand in our mutual relationship? So, Håvard, if you go first, and then our Ukrainian colleagues will have time to think.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm not a researcher on Ukraine, so I'm not really qualified to say much about misconception about Ukraine, I think, but I've been studying Russia for 18 years. So I can at least say something about that, which is very relevant in this context, of course. And one misconception is that Russia is orderly and well-functioning, so that it's kind of a machine where you have a chess player on top who is able to realize all his plans. I've been increasingly, but I guess for 15 years, been looking at local phenomenon in Russia and to see how different they are and how messy everything is, and how much is lost on the way down to implementation level. So this is of course a cliché about the dictatorship also, that you can just input something in the top and it gets and it kind of just moves through the system without resistance. But in Russia this is less true than most places because it's so corrupt. So everything gets very distorted in the bureaucracy. Everything got stolen in the way, and it's also and there are a lot of self-interested actors on the way. But also it's so huge in itself, so it's extremely difficult to get everything. That's just one thing that I've been thinking about in this context. And I think the other ones got time to think.
Yeah. What is it that Ukrainians don't fully realize about Western or Northern Europe? Please unmute.
Yeah, I suppose in the context of the modern events, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the context of the Russian-Ukrainian war and other things. Well, Russia did everything to make this war, like we used to call it hybrid war in 2013, because Russia made everything possible to confuse us, to confuse Western society, what it was in Crimea, what happened in Donbass. And oh, I'm sorry. I should start from the
Yes, please start again.
if I remember. In the 2014, we used to call events in Ukraine the hybrid war, because Russia did everything possible to confuse us and confuse Western society for what was going on in the Crimea, what was going on in Donbass. And from our point of view, we thought like, oh, it's so obvious for us. Why isn't it so obvious for Western researchers, for example? Why do they use these terms? How they are so confused between annexation, occupation. If it's so obvious for us, why is it so obvious? It's not obvious for them. So I guess it was one of the misunderstandings, because different approaches to terminology. To defend ourselves, we should say that Russia did everything, spent lots of resources to confuse us all. But in fact, now I think we are more closer now in terms, in understanding. It's been 10 years, actually. We had a lot of time to, let's say, understand each other and what's going on in Ukraine. So.
Mm-hmm.
This is still a problem in the Norwegian press, for instance. We are having these misconceptions about 2014. They have been very persistent. Now it's not as big problem in 2022, but the whole events of 2014. Even I've seen Norwegian journalists, even in 2022, referring to referendums in Crimea as if they were not falsified, which is just a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the Northern Europe, yes? Look at us. We are Ukrainians. We are staying right now here in Northern Europe. So obviously, Northern Europe stands with Ukraine, such as your country. So we are grateful for you, for your support in this case.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Perhaps I can just add, if I may. One of the things that I find noteworthy is the fact that Ukraine, our perception of Ukraine has changed so dramatically since 2022. The popular understanding of Ukraine was very different before the full-scale invasion, if you compare it to the present-day situation. So we have learned a lot and have gained new insights into how Ukraine actually works. And if I may, it's sort of an anecdotal basis, but part of the former Soviet Union was a black box for us. And people are now seeing the finer details and the more granular aspects of life, and see now that it's very different. So, do we have another question from the audience? Otherwise, I have one, if I may. Perhaps a final question. And I'm interested in the Lenin statues. Now, you showed the map. I have two things that I would like to ask. One is, do you also see the reintroduction of Lenin statues in occupied Crimea? And why is it that, and maybe you demonstrated this and I wasn't fully paying attention, but why is it that it's being reintroduced in the occupied territories, whereas when we see it in Russia, of course, it's a very different situation? Is this because part of the population is really not pro-Russian, but actually pro-Soviet? So it in a way, it's an attempt to reach out to an audience, a segment within the occupied territories, which are really pro-Soviet.
Do you hear me?
Please unmute.
Thank you for your questions. First of all,
we don't hear you. Did you unmute or did you mute? Much better.
Do you hear me?
Do we hear?
Super. Thank you for your questions. About Crimea and about territory who was occupied in the first stage of Russian-Ukrainian war. I mean the so-called Ardlo or DNR or DPR territory. Campaign of Leninapad Leninapad started in 2015. In that time, in fact, Russia started to control during this Leninapad in the rest part of Ukraine. Russia always controlled territory of Crimea Peninsula. It means that just a separate Lenin monuments were destroyed during Leninapad in Crimea. And I know at least one case when in territory of Crimea, one Lenin was restored. Just one. And several in the territory of a separatistic republic in the east of Ukraine. And according to the second question, yes, I absolutely agree with you. When I explore the cases when local activists initiated the rebuilding of Lenin monuments, it was aged people in very old age, and who had Komsomol or Communist Party membership, and in their speeches they talked only about Soviet past and nothing about Russia support, Russia future at all. Mm-hmm. So my answer is yes. Okay. This is a resentment for Soviet times.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for joining us today in what has been quite a hectic day with 2 seminars. Please be reminded we have 2 seminars again tomorrow. This doesn't mean that you should stay, you should leave, but then you should come back tomorrow. And we'll start tomorrow at 9:30. And if you arrive a bit early, there'll be coffee for you before we start. We have James Nixie who's the director of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. He'll be speaking about lessons of the war and prospects for the war. And then we go on with another panel from the Contested Ukraine Research Project, and we'll be looking at the wider security developments in and around Ukraine. Before we leave, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. We have Olha Pashkova, we have Håvard Bækken, we have Andrei Bulyuha, and of course we have Mykola Homanyuk. So thank you very much for joining us.